Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. This is a special live episode that was recorded in late June 2023 at the first ever Old Salt Festival, which was held on the Mannix family ranch in Helmville, Montana. The Old Salt Festival is a 3-day celebration of ranching, land stewardship, and wild places that features live Western music, wood-fired cooking, products from some of the West's most renowned artisans, readings and interviews with Western authors and poets, and in-depth discussions about conservation and land stewardship. This year's festival was a resounding success, so I'm thrilled to share one of the many conversations with you here. The episode is a panel discussion titled Rebuilding a Resilient Regional Meat Supply Chain, featuring several of the West's leading voices in sustainable meat production and regenerative agriculture. In order of their appearance in the episode, you'll hear from Cole Mannix, president of the Old Salt Co-op, Kate Kavanaugh, owner of Western Daughters Butcher Shoppe and the host of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, Dan Miller, founder of Steward, and Wyatt Nelson, president of Wild West Local Foods. As you'll hear, each panelist is deeply immersed in a different aspect of the meat production supply chain, and each of them brings a unique and wise perspective to the challenges facing producers and small businesses involved in meat production. Many of you already know, but the Old Salt Festival is part of the Old Salt Co-op, a new purpose-driven company that, quote, provides meat raised with integrity from Montana landscapes its customers know and care about. The Old Salt Co-op is working to rebuild the meat business in Montana, creating a sustainable business model that's beneficial to local ranchers, local customers, and local economies, all while responsibly and effectively stewarding the lands that support agriculture. Rebuilding Montana's meat supply chain is no small feat, but with smart, purpose-driven people like Cole, Kate, Dan, and Wyatt working to find solutions, I think you'll be both inspired and encouraged. A huge thanks to Cole and the Old Salt team for inviting me to the festival, and a huge thanks to the Mannix family for sharing their stunning ranch with all of us. Thanks to Cole, Kate, Dan, and Wyatt for sharing their wisdom, and last but definitely not least, thanks to the one and only, always hilarious, always energetic Bex Frucht for the amazing intro. Hope you enjoy.
So I am really excited to bring my buddy, Ed Robertson, back to the Range Revolution stage. He's the visionary and charming Southern voice behind the Mountain and Prairie podcast, which I'm guessing a lot of y'all get to listen to. It's such a cool community. There's a book club. And we really need to give him some energy because by choice, he's into strenuous living, you know? He's a real fanboy for Teddy Roosevelt. And so he may have climbed a mountain or some other craziness this morning. So we need to bring him some energy because Lord knows what he's been up to. And I just want to say that Mountain and Prairie, I think, has been instrumental in bringing this community of folks together. And so I think it's such a lovely partnership to have Ed here with the Old Salt Festival for the first ever one. So y'all give a warm, warm welcome to Ed Robertson. And maybe a roundhouse kick, because he's really into Roadhouse. Yeah, it's round. It's round. It's like this. Ed Robertson.
Thank you, Bex. As usual, I need to hire you to follow me around in day-to-day life. We've got a great panel here, and selfishly, when I think about these things, it's always a relief to be on a panel with a bunch of really smart people, because it's once again, all I have to do is just kind of get out of the way. But I wanted, we're recording this and it'll go out on my podcast. And so before we start, I thought because it's going to be recorded, people are going to be listening without the audio, without the visual, we're just going to get everybody to do a brief intro, who they are, what they do, so people can recognize the voices. And then I'll start pestering you with questions. So Mr. Mannix, you're first.
All right. Thanks, Ed. I'm Cole Mannix. I grew up here, and I live in Helena. And I grew up here on my family's ranch where we're recording the podcast, and live in Helena, and today operate Old Salt Co-op with a whole bunch of friends and partners trying to regionalize our meat in Montana.
My name is Kate Kavanaugh, and I own Western Daughters Butcher Shoppe in Denver, Colorado, where we've been operating for the last almost 11 years and support farmers and ranchers that have regenerative practices along the Front Range. I also operate the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, and I do a tiny bit of farming myself.
And I'm Dan Miller, the founder of Steward, which is a online financing platform for regenerative agriculture. Capital is really hard to come by for every producer, particularly regenerative producers. So the goal of our business is to take the capital from the people who care about this work and get it in the hands of the producers. And so we're working with Old Salt and lots of great companies around the country.
Great. Thank you so much. It was interesting yesterday when I was listening to Cole's dad read those letters from Cole's ancestors and thinking about the title of this particular session. It's Rebuilding a Resilient Regional Meat Supply Chain. And thinking about that back in the 1800s, I feel like it was definitely resilient and it was a lot more regional than what we've got now in 2023, which is kind of wild to think about. And so, Cole, I was wondering, just to start it out, you know, you're the kind of guy who decides he wants to start a music festival on his family ranch and bring in thousands of people. And so I wanted to really hear, what was the tipping point when you decided we need to start Old Salt Co-op? We need to bring people together. What was both the challenge and the main opportunity that you saw? And here's Wyatt, who's also joining us.
Ed, are you interested especially in the festival itself?
No, in the actual meat co-op, because I feel like you've been up here giving so much credit to everybody else and highlighting all these other great people. Now I'm going to force you to talk about yourself and your meat business and what is behind all of this wonderful festival that we're enjoying.
Well, we have lots of challenges, and there's not one thing that needs to be rebuilt in terms of rebuilding local infrastructure for buying products from local producers. Pretty much every component of the supply chain needs to be rebuilt. One, for example, that my family was experiencing was processing, but it's also a bandwidth question. Every ranch and farm that is trying to run their own website and trying to run their own social media and trying to do pack orders in the freezers just before they go out to change water. They struggle with questions of, okay, do we have the bandwidth and the skill set internally to grow? They're also running up, in terms of my own family's case, we have a wonderful meat processor in Superior, but we've kind of exceeded their capacity. And yet we don't have the funds or the scale, frankly, to invest in our own facility by ourselves. And so we banded together the J. Barrell ranches, the LF Ranch, Sieben Livestock Company with a few core producer partners, but we also brought in Andrew Mace on the culinary and marketing side, who's prepared the hog meal and has been behind almost all, so much of the thought of that went into the cooking here. Ross Eikenberry on the side of digital marketing and understanding e-commerce. And we had to put a whole bunch of skill sets together. And the idea was just to work together with a group of producers, but a group of all the marketing and processing infrastructure that's required. And then ultimately, more than processing, more than anything else in my mind, we need to be able to connect with customers that will buy their meat some other way than they are used to buying it. How do you do that? How do you connect with people? And I don't think, there's not one way. I don't really have a lot of faith in the ability of a label or a certification to communicate a lot of value. I think the most real relationships and trust are built in person. And so it's one of the reasons for this event. It's one of the reasons we are operating in a restaurant with another one on the way. It's doing some catering. It's just trying to have authentic connections where there's something other than an anonymous food.
Well, and just going down the line here, Kate, so much of your career has been that personal connection with your customer. And at Western Daughters in Denver, and then you've also seen it from the producer side of things. And so when you hear Cole's idea and the idea of Old Salt and all these great people that are here together, given your experience interacting with the customer for so many years, building up a business, what do you see as some of maybe the top two main challenges? Because we've got a financing expert, we've got a distribution expert. You're kind of got a foot in all the different pools. What do you see as a main roadblock?
I think it's hard to reduce it to one single thing. And this is actually a lot of what I focused my work on, is how we can look at things from the complex space that they are, that it's not one single thing that is broken. It's not one single hurdle. And I think what I see right now is that you have three main shareholders in the food supply system as we're talking about it here. You have consumers, you have producers, ranchers, and farmers, and then you have kind of a catch-all of third parties. These are going to be slaughterhouses, butchers, aggregators, restaurants that are helping to support that supply chain. And I think that one of the biggest hurdles that we face right now is that each one of those shareholders is working on very slim margins, as it were. It's a little bit harder to couch for the consumer, but I think that you have an average of 2.5% margins across ranching in the United States, which means that you are just one disaster away from this tanking your operation or being really difficult. On the aggregators and butcher shop, they're working on a similar margin structure. It is ultra slim. And so it's like driving a car really fast down a very small highway when you're looking at this. And then I think you have a consumer that largely is facing a lot of increasing costs and hurdles to getting better food. And so I think the question then becomes, that second hurdle then becomes, how do we change the story that we're telling ourselves? And how do we begin to build this sort of cooperative ecosystem, maybe that mirrors the soil food web within those three shareholders? And I actually think that when you look at what you're doing with Old Salt, you're touching something really important, which is putting culture back in agriculture, that we have lost so much of this community basis of knowing one another, of shaking one another's hands, of having that relationship with where our food comes from, with the people that grow our food, and sort of restoring this idea of story as a component of nutrient density. And I think about this a lot, right? Like, you just heard Diana get up here and talk about some of the nutrient deficiencies that we face. And I think one of those is story and where our food comes from and knowing those people and relationship.
Kate is so smart. And if you want more of that, listen to her podcast. She's a lot smarter than me, and you'll learn a lot more. Dan, when we hear these numbers that Kate mentioned, these very slim margins, and you're in the business of helping finance, and this is not 2.5% margin. We're not talking Silicon Valley startups here. So what attracted you to get into the business of trying to help finance regenerative agriculture?
I think the consumer interest that everyone sees, that everyone's here for, has been apparent. There's a lot more people looking to buy different product. They want to build those direct customer relationships. But then you talk to the producers and they have no access to capital. So as much as consumer demand can pull it, without the resources you need for capital, it's not going to fit. And so it's through actually a chef I met named Spike Jurdy from Woodbury Kitchen, sourced from over 150 farmers in the Mid-Atlantic watershed, single-handedly created his own economy of purchasing. And yet all the producers who he was celebrating still didn't have access to funding. And that's because the funding is commoditized. There's no relationship in the funding. People don't think about a personal connection with their capital. They just go to a bank and go to wherever. And so by giving people the chance to fund these projects, they can have their values with it. So maybe the cost of capital isn't as high it would have been through a traditional source, or they're more willing to adjust during issues that happen with any loan. And then the Old Salt model, and where I think the margins are, is right now there's lots of different people with different margins that don't have integrated systems. And if you integrate those systems all the way through producer and employee owned, slaughter, processing, end market, and value add, you now can share that margin with the whole network. And until there's transparency and margin going to all the players in a network, you're not going to see that type of resilience. But I think these types of models, and we're working with flour mills and other intermediate processors, even though processing is normally not considered a good business, it's actually the meeting point, a nexus between consumers and producers. And so we view it as, we need to finance this infrastructure. We have thousands of people on our platform and all the types of people here who want to put their money towards these types of things. And if people are funding these types of projects and buying from these types of producers, it creates its own microeconomic cycle. So similar to regional supply chains, it's distributed capital. You're not reliant on a centralized system. So it was out of seeing the consumer interest not being met with the change in funding. And now I just realized that it completely changes the dynamic when you have a direct relationship with your capital, just like when you have a direct relationship with your consumer. And so we're building those networks, we're telling stories, and people are earning a return, but they're doing it because they care and they want to see more of these businesses prosper.
Thank you for that. Wyatt, two questions for you. One, quickly introduce yourself, tell everybody what you do, and then you're deep in the distribution world. Oh, and I like your hat. My buddy's Matt Skoglund.
Thank you. I like him too.
Yeah. But if you could just talk a bit about kind of the challenges when you wake up in the morning, you think about, all right, there are going to be some challenges come my way today. What are those? What are you dealing with on a daily basis that kind of is roadblocks to a better, more sustainable system from the distribution side of things?
My name is Wyatt Nelson. I'm a local distributor here in Montana. I've been working with local farms and ranches for the last 10 to 15 years. And when I wake up in the morning, there are plenty of obstacles every single day that I wake up in the morning. Going back to a lot of points of the margin and the slim margin, and going back to Old Salt and how it's a co-op and how everybody's communicating. I've discovered that it's really important for someone like myself to know what everyone does in that chain and can open up the line of communication so that we can all talk to each other and make sure that we are meeting our margins along the way. And not a lot of distributors that I know of have that open line of communication from the ranch all the way to the retail or the restaurant. And it's really important that we all work together and communicate along the way so that we are all successful, so that we can all grow together. Because if any of us drop out of the communication or drop out of this chain, the whole thing falls apart, right? Yep. So that is an obstacle that I deal with every single day, and try to communicate to the whole group. Every time I'm talking to new ranchers, new farmers, just that whole business model on how I think that is how it needs to work.
And this is kind of for everybody, and feel free if my questions are insufficient for you guys to ask each other questions, because there's so much here. When you hear these stories, and everybody here understands what we're talking about, and I think if you found an average person on the street and you told them what you do and these challenges, they would agree, well, that's not great. But how do you go about capturing people's attention? I think Kate does it great in her podcast. Cole, everything we're doing here is great for that, to get it out into the world, to the average person who just goes to the grocery store and wants to buy some meat. But I feel like the ultimate challenge today, we've just got this Niagara Falls of information, good, bad, everything. There's a lot of really good stuff, but it's too much. And my brain just can't process it all. And so sometimes even knowing what I know about everything y'all do, it's not easy to make a decision. So when you're thinking about the end consumer, and anybody's welcome to answer this, how do you capture their attention and make them care? Because I feel like that's kind of the trick.
Good question. I would love to know that. I think a lot of us feel overloaded by information, and I think a lot of times brands are trying to catch attention by making huge claims about the way they can impact the world. And I think that's overpromising. I think a lot of times regenerative agriculture can overpromise, because oftentimes being productive while maintaining the health of a landscape, especially in the West, is itself a really good achievement. And without being too bombastic about the difference we're making in the world, the only thing I know is I think it just only can happen gradually. People have to be in the right place, at a place in their lives where they're trying to find what's fundamental, trying to sort out the noise. They're trying to, get down to the essence. Like for them, what is a meaningful life? How am I going to get the crap out of our cupboards and mostly have the essentials, and we'll be healthier and our kids will eat better that way? How do I get the crap out of my mind, in social media or whatever? And how do I just have a manageable life where I feel like the main components in my life, as much as possible, the way we're using energy, as much as possible, the way I'm feeding my family, movement. It's just people who are, I think, are hungry by and large to cut through the noise, because there's so much of it. And I think we just have to be patient with that transition, try to have authentic experiences and interaction. And from the food side, I do not think we should overpromise about our products. It's just, in a lot of ways, ranching is not sexy at all. You're just trying to You're trying to make sure enough value gets to each part of the supply chain. We can all make a good enough living, the resources well cared for, and it still winds up being reasonable, affordable for the customer. And I'll just end by saying I'm unapologetic about the price of meat. It's the best nutrition per ounce per unit that we have, with the possible exception of oysters, which I think is meat anyway.
I want to add a little bit to this, that I think that there are two main core values that I really see when we're trying to capture attention. And I think that's curiosity and connection. And I think that our connection to our food is something that is encoded in what it is to be human, that throughout most of human history, we have been hunters, we have been gatherers. A lot of our days have been spent around the collection and processing of food. And I think that there are a lot of people that are experiencing a feeling that something in their life is missing. And I think some of that is connection, not just to our food, but to place through our food, to be a part of an ecosystem, even if you're in an urban environment, to have a connection to where your food comes from, because essentially we are made out of place. All the nutrients in the soil and the relationships between the grasses and the sun and the soil food web and the ruminant that's grazing them is flowing through us to create our bodies and have this elegant conversation with our biology. And I think that we're missing that connection point, and you can leverage curiosity. And I think in a world where there is absolutely too much information, this waterfall of information, to get a little bit curious about process, about where our food or where anything comes from, honestly, and to leverage that to then dive into having this connection with a local farm, a local ranch, a butcher shop, whatever that is, can be pretty powerful.
And I think it's very personal, and we're still at the early days of consumers becoming aware. I mean, I come from 6th generation of farmers in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, but I grew up in Washington, D.C. My mom left the farm, and so for me, it was trying to reconnect with that history and understand the landscape and the Chesapeake Bay and how to restore it. And in an effort to find those producers doing that, then brought the opportunity to support them. And so I think right now in everyone's journey, it's they have to go a lot of different ways. They have to learn a lot on their own. They have to find it themselves. And I think the next step is getting the processing infrastructure, getting the market to a scale where it can deliver product reliably at real volumes at wholesale to really put it in front of people, because it is hard to buy these types of products these days. You do have to go out of your way. And so realistically, we're still at the early days, I think, of the consumer shift. But generationally, people younger than me, I mean, really are thoughtful about purchasing and using their purchasing power to affect change. And I think that's what people need to realize. Their resources are being used in the system to push the conventional model. If they pull their resources out and direct those purchasing power funding projects within their own power, they can affect that change. And so I think each person individually has to take their own action. And that's now leading to fundamental shifts where even multinational corporations are realizing they need to get on it. That's a separate question of how do you keep them out of it. But there's definitely an awareness that the consumer demand is fundamentally changed.
I'll add to that. What I've noticed in Montana and moving around Montana with my customers is a lot of the consumers in restaurants and retail, they assume that if they're eating beef in Montana, that they're eating Montana beef. And you drive across this state and you see beef all over the place, and you go into a restaurant and there's beef on the plate. You would think it would be smart that the beef from that neighborhood would be on your plate. So for me, it's about educating consumers, even in my own community, even all you all talking to your communities and talking about getting people to go in and eat in a restaurant and say, where is this product from? Where is this beef from? I want to support local beef. Because if we're doing that, then we're supporting our local farms and ranches. Then we're not just assuming that we're just supporting the beef industry around the world. We're supporting our local beef industry. And I try to open that line of communication with my customers so that they start to ask those questions, even if they're not buying from me.
Cole, I'd love to get you to start out on this one. In a previous life, I was in the real estate business, and then I shifted over into the conservation world. and working mostly with farmers on the Lower Arkansas River in Colorado. And, when I was selling ranches or when I was doing farming conservation, you hear all these statistics about the demographics of the average agricultural producer. And then you hear all the statistics about what a tight business it is and what a challenging business it is. And there are a lot of times where the younger generation comes around. They're like, man, this is tough. I want to go to a city. I don't know why, but I'll go sit in a cubicle instead of doing this. And then when you think about this beautiful place where we are, it's the farmers and ranchers and the stewards of the land that keep these landscapes intact and keep them from being split up and turned into these tiny ranchettes. And so, Cole, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about kind of this particular valley and the work that you and all your neighbors have done, because in our conversations preparing for this, you talked about, all the families here. Some of them do, specific regenerative practices. Some of them are more traditional ranchers, but you're all devoted to keeping your business going so that you can keep this landscape intact. I'd love to hear more about that, because I feel like when we're looking at it right now and thinking that this is at risk if the business of ranching doesn't work. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I would say that there's just no bright line between what's a regenerative practice and what's not a regenerative practice. And there are a tremendous number of ranches in this valley that endure because they are respectful and they do think about the long term. And, they're not trying to maximize in the short term. Like I said yesterday on a separate panel, it's not just agriculture in this valley, but it's a whole bunch of other nonprofit partnerships that go into keeping it all intact. But I think our values as a society, you can't really attribute to any one thing, but our values have been, we want consistent, convenient, and inexpensive food. And at the end of the day, that will drive stewardship out, because there's more values than just the price and the convenience that are important. And I think that's back to connection. I think one of the reasons why there's so many of my cousins and brothers and sisters that want to come back and find a place at the ranch, it's because my aunts and uncles and mom and dad started this local beef program, which still is not, it's not at all the majority of the majority of the livestock we sell is still on the commodity market. Let's say 20 to 30% of our business is local. But just their bravery, 15 years ago of, okay, we'll start selling at the good food store. We'll start selling at the farmer's market. It was an avenue for customers to, all of a sudden we had, all of us kids, interaction with the customer. We started to be connected in a way we had never been to people who had some interest, some questions about the way we were raising it. All of a sudden it felt like it mattered. And so I think that it's back to, I think what Kate was talking about with connection. Connecting with our customers in an authentic way is not any different than connecting with our. We've been very fortunate. The ranch has put in a little pool of money to start up. To have a ton of cash to risk, especially on something as hard as meat, and a community of like 20 different high net worth investors who they had some capital. They've got and invested in many things, but they were looking to put it to work more locally, and they knew that we weren't going to give them the best return. We'd be lucky to give them a return. But they were investing for many intangible reasons. And they're pretty tangible reasons, but they're just not. They don't show up on a spreadsheet. Well, and so I just see that connection with investors, with customers, with your distributor it's all the same connection.
And Cole's humble because an idea, they're great ideas, but what they're investing in are the people behind the ideas. Those types that you're talking about, they can invest their money wherever they want. And, if I told them the exact same thing you said and asked for money, they'd say, hit the road. You don't know what you're doing. But it's you and your team, and so I think
they give it to you.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the, people not taking over the family farm. So probably half of the farmers we've funded, about 100 now, aren't from non-farm backgrounds. And so there are a lot of people from non-farm backgrounds who want to get into this because of the meaning, because of the interest, because of the connection. And then there are people in the new generation of family farms who want to do it a different way. So I think there's very little demand in taking over existing conventional operations as they are today because it's not fun and the margins are terrible and the work maybe isn't as rewarding. But we worked with a farmer who grew up on a dairy in Wisconsin, milked 24 hours a day, 1,000 cows, mega dairy. He moved to Southern Oregon, started making his own milk, started making his own cheese, and now does award-winning cheese. And he just wanted to do it in his own way with craft, with care. And so I do think there is demand for people to get into agriculture. It just needs to be a different type.
I'll support that too. I've met a lot of young ranchers who have come back, who have left and gone and lived in the cities, and they've come back with new ideas and have been educated in different areas that they've realized are really important for modern agriculture, coming back with a marketing degree and working in a city and selling retail that may not be food, but knowing that coming back and working with the ranch, that is something important that needs to be integrated into your sales if you're going to sell locally or if you're going to grow. So I think there's a lot more opportunity that I'm seeing with these young folks coming back to their ranches with these big, brilliant ideas that are going to be really helpful to continue to grow this industry.
That speaks to what David James Duncan has been talking about, and is one of the big themes of Sunhouse is we need a change of consciousness. And it's interesting how that fiction lines up exactly with on-the-ground work that's happening. Kate?
I'll be quick. I just think that it's worth adding. Wes Jackson has this idea of homecoming and what it means to come back to the family ranch, the family farm. But I think that applies too for first generation farmers. I'm a first generation farmer, and it's coming home to the idea of growing food, of stewardship. And I think that one of the things that I want to see more of is connection of skill sets. That I think that there are a lot of first generation farmers that are wanting for mentorship, that are wanting for that older generation to help them come in. And they also have a lot to add in the ideas that they're bringing to the table, the idea of coming back and making artisanal cheese from this dairy background. And so integrating that and having a sort of intergenerational skill set. And I think that these skills are vital, right? We have 44,000 generations of hunters in human history. And it's amazing how quickly we can lose these skills, whether it's hunting or it's more of an agricultural setting. And so transmission of skills has to be an important part of homecoming.
Well, Kate, while you have the mic, I'd love to hear more about kind of what you're seeing on the ground on the retail side of things, because it's, I think when you have these great conversations and people are generally being, very, very kind of showing the best side of things, I think that can not give an accurate picture of how hard the work is and some of the realities of just dollars and cents. And so I think that's important. I think in this world of Instagram, people just think that it's out riding horses and doing this in these beautiful landscapes. But at the end of the day, it's an extremely tough business with entrenched status quo players. It's tough. So, Kate, I'd love a kind of a clear-eyed view of what you're seeing, and then maybe thoughts from everybody about little steps that can be taken to change it. And like Cole has said over and over, it's not going to happen overnight. But can you just kind of give us what you're dealing with now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been running my butcher shop for almost 11 years, and my husband and I have been sitting down and talking about whether or not it's economically viable at this point. And I'll tell you what I tell people, which is what keeps me up at night, is that I'm paying farmers and ranchers a lot better than most people, and it's still not enough. Their margins aren't enough. I'm paying our employees better than a lot of people, and it's still not enough for them to have the quality of life that they deserve in the city. And at the end of the day, that means that we don't quite have enough left over to operate our shop. And so about 52 cents of every dollar you spend at Western Daughters goes back to a farmer or rancher. About 30 cents of every dollar goes back to our employees, and what's left over just isn't enough for us to run the ins and outs of the business. And I think that I'm not alone in facing some of these challenges. And what we've been talking about is you have this squeeze in those three shareholders that I was talking about. And how do we get to a place where we have financial regeneration and where we have regeneration, I think, of the human component, that we don't have burnout happening on farmer side or butcher side or distributor side, that we're all putting a lot into this. And yeah, what was the next little bit of question on that? And
then kind of on the upside, what needs to happen? What needs to happen to make it more viable? I mean, like I know it's a million things, but if say there's one or two things that could shift that would help you.
I think there's a couple of things, and I think what you said is really important, that we have to communicate at every level. And I think that there's going to be some really beautiful models that we can follow of sort of small scale vertical integration within a single business. But then I think there has to be this layering and stacking of vertical functions between farmers, processors, distributors, where there has to be that really clear line that a rising tide is going to lift all ships. And that component of cooperation and transparency. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that in sharing this bit of transparency, it helps us address where some of these pinch points are in a more honest way. And I think a lot of us in regenerative, whatever you want to call it, communities talk a lot about transparency on sourcing or what animals are eating. But I think that should also apply to transparency on how farmers and ranchers are being paid and where those hardships are. And I think that, one other component that I have to say here is that when I look at the 11-year history of Western Daughters, while it hasn't been financially successful, we have given $6 million back to farmers and ranchers in 11 years. It's 2,000 acres under regenerative management that has built topsoil in the West and really bolstered rural economies. And to me, that is massive amount of success, just not quite in the way that we couch it in today's terms.
You describe the impact, not just as your profit. And that's really why I began from restaurant side. It was like this restaurant had $20 million of purchasing of local food and millions of dollars of payroll. That in and of itself is successful. And so if each part of the chain has to be its own profit center, it becomes complicated. But if you realize that each part is bringing value down the value chain, then there's a way to integrate it. So I think it is putting those pieces together and understanding that not every part needs to be extremely profitable. It's about bringing value back to producers and every employee along that supply chain working. I mean, for me, I'm biased. I think the biggest challenge is capital. I mean, that's the point of our business, the point of our platform. I don't meet any regenerative producer who has enough access to capital or even close to it. We're working with somebody now who has over $20 million of sales, millions of dollars of unleveraged assets, still can't get conventional financing. So it doesn't matter how successful you are, you're not well supported. And until you're well supported as a business in the sector, it's barely making it work. And that can only stay along for so long.
While I've got Cole captive audience, he's so humble, he won't ever really brag about anything he's doing. But I was catching up with Cole before this festival, and I said, so how's everything going? And I didn't even tell you this. You went into this telling me everything that was going, but it didn't have anything to do with the festival. It was all about the money you're raising and all the different things you're putting into place. And I was thinking, that is a focused, hardworking guy. He's got 1,000 people showing up at his ranch, and he's thinking about plenty of other things than that. And so I'm going to force you to talk about Old Salt, the co-op. What are you working on right now? What are you raising money for? What can we expect if things go as you hope over the next 18 months for Old Salt? And don't be humble.
Well, one of the biggest things we're doing right now is we're building infrastructure on the processing side. So we have a construction project for a slaughter facility. We have a construction project to modify our cut and wrap facility, both to get to USDA inspection. We purchased a restaurant that we are working to renovate into a butcher shop and charcoal fire grill in Helena. Once again, that's meant to be a relationship builder. And so it's trying to get those construction projects financed and then just designed. What exactly are we doing working with all the contractors? It's trying to plan to have the human capital that we're going to need when those are ready so that we have a team that can process. And we've been very fortunate to have a good core group. Steward, as a bank, has been irreplaceable. If we would not have found Steward, we would not be here today. So it does take capital. Our next stage, though, is those facilities have to be busy. You're going to take out that kind of debt, and you have your payments. They have to have throughput, and it takes time to build a market. And so we're going to rely on also processing for other ranches and farms that are trying to sell locally. We're going to rely on partnerships with people like Wyatt, who they know the customer from the perspective of a restaurant client. They know the logistics of, getting full loaded trucks to where they need to go. They know how to receive orders and then deliver on those orders. And then planning on the supply chain for a wholesale client is so much different than planning it for a gradually growing direct-to-consumer market. It's just a different scale of risk. I think in 18 months, hopefully before that, we'll be in the black. That would be great. Maybe we'll have held another festival. I have no idea.
Yes, I think there's a demand for that. No question.
Within 18 months, you'll be able to take an animal all the way through slaughter, processing, to selling at your restaurant without anyone else in between.
That's right. I think the 5-year trajectory of things could work. We could sell several thousand head. It's not huge, but on the scale of things, but it would be meaningful change. Several thousand head of Montana livestock that weren't staying in the state will be staying in the state, and people that eat that meat will have more connection to the landscapes they came from. That would be a big deal. Maybe we employ 50 people. That's impact that matters, right? I think in 18 months we could have that kind of just livelihoods for more people in the system, working in it and giving their passion, their time, and their resources to it.
When I think about the crowd here, I don't think anybody here needs to be converted to this way of thinking. I think everybody is pretty much in agreement and has a good understanding of all these issues. But I think the power of a group like this, we've got all these people. If everybody went out and did something, took some action, and we've got producers here, we've got people like me who live in a city of 500,000 people, a wide range of people here who are bought in and who can make a difference. And I always want my podcast or anything I do to be actionable, not just talking in circles. And so I'd love to hear from everybody, almost like a homework assignment for the people in the audience who are bought in, who want to do good, who are here for a lot more than just the music. What's one simple thing that people could do in y'all's mind that would help get the momentum going a little bit further in the right direction? And anybody can jump in.
Next time you go shopping, buy something local. Buy local beef.
So here's a question about that, and I'm so far on the outside. Like, I was at a conference down in Santa Fe, and it blew my mind that, and again, this shows my ignorance, but that's what I do on the podcast to show how dumb I am. That there was legislation, if you find a steak in the grocery store and it says "Made in the USA," it could have come from Brazil, and they just processed it, and it processed part of it in the U.S. So for somebody how do you know? I mean, how do you not get tricked by these people? Because they're master trickers. I
would say when, ask for the head of the butcher department in your grocery store or in your meat department or your butcher shop, and ask them. And if they don't know, then don't buy the product. I would say most local products that I've seen in our local grocery stores, they'll give you the address of where they are. They'll give you contact information. And typically you can pick up the phone and call the farm or ranch, and they answer. And they're real people, and they'll tell you all about it.
For us, we're actually about to close the financing on Old Salt slaughter and processing facilities. So in about 2 weeks, Old Salt will send an email asking you all if you want to help fund the infrastructure they need to be successful. And so that's about as tangible as it gets.
Yeah, that's great.
I'd say to make a personal connection. Go shake the hand of a local farmer or a rancher. Usually they're closer than you think. And go walk out on that land and make a connection to your ecosystem too, because I think that ties you in both to community in our human community and community within our ecosystem.
Heck yeah. Round of applause for that, Kate. I would just say, I have no business speaking up here with all the people I can see in the audience who have a lot more I guess my point is, go meet somebody at this festival. There's an incredible group of people here gathered, which I'm so grateful for. And you're all working on incredibly interesting things. So go meet somebody you don't already know, and it'll really move. What we feed grows, and whether we're feeding our time or our other resources like financial, it will grow. And so go use the connections with other people that you make at the festival, and bring it forward in your own work. And then I would say listen to Ed Roberson's podcast, Mountain and Prairie. It's another great way to network.
No, I'd say listen to Kate's podcast.
He didn't pay me for that.
Yeah, and I mean, not that I'm an expert, but I really think having conversations with people the podcast is a very selfish thing because I don't want to be messing up the world, and I want to do the right thing. But a lot of it has been education for me, and having Cole and Kate on the podcast and them answer my questions and teach me as people that I trust, it has changed my behavior. And so I think being able to patiently explain to people you know and love in a way that's not confrontational like a lot of the media is these days. I mean, I think there's a lot of power in that word of mouth. We're bumping up on time now, but we're not going to do Q&A because one of the great things about this festival is all these folks are going to be milling about. You can go and have a real conversation with them. But we're going to wrap it up now. But thank you all so much for your interest. Thank you to everybody in the crowd for everything you're doing. It's so inspiring to be here, and I just really appreciate it. Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.